Breaking, Keir Starmer just exploded live on air, and it was aimed directly at Richard Tice. The Labour leader, usually calm and measured, lost his composure in front of the cameras as the Reform Party unleashed its most aggressive move yet. Councils under Reform's control have filed emergency legal action against the government over migrant hotels, giving Westminster just 24 hours to resolve. The deadline is tomorrow night, and the confrontation that followed has pushed UK politics into uncharted chaos. Starmer's furious outburst was not just about Tice or the migrant hotel crisis, it was about the very survival of his government's authority. What unfolded live has sent shockwaves across Parliament, and it might be the breaking point that changes everything. Richard Tice took to GB News this morning with a revelation that stunned the political class. He announced that a Reform-led council had officially filed legal papers to block the government's migrant hotel placements. Not just in the near future, not as a political stunt, but right now, with the courts being asked to act by tomorrow evening. The government has been handed a deadline, and if it fails to respond, it risks losing control over its own immigration policy. That announcement was enough to set Westminster on edge, but it was Starmer's reaction that turned this into a political earthquake. Live during an interview, Starmer lashed out at Tice, calling Reform's move reckless, irresponsible, and a direct attack on the stability of Britain. But his voice wasn't calm or controlled. It was explosive, the tone of a prime minister under siege. He accused Tice of playing with the constitution, of using the courts as political weapons, and of deliberately trying to throw Britain into chaos. For Starmer, this wasn't just about hotels. This was about authority. The context here is critical. For months, Labour has been struggling to manage the migrant accommodation crisis. Local communities have protested against hotels being used to house asylum seekers, arguing that they were never consulted, that safety was ignored, and that their towns have been turned upside down overnight. The government kept insisting it had the situation under control. But the truth, exposed by one legal case after another, is that it doesn't. The Court of Appeal ruling on the Bell Hotel gave councils the precedent to strike back. Reform seized that moment with perfect timing. Tice framed this as a legal uprising. Not just one council, but potentially 12 preparing to take the same step. And that's what truly broke Starmer's composure. Because if councils start winning in court, then the entire immigration strategy collapses. The government won't just be embarrassed, it will be paralysed. Starmer's explosion reveals more than anger, it reveals fear. He knows that if the reform strategy works, it sets a precedent that councils can challenge central government on almost any policy. Housing, healthcare, education, once the door is open, nothing is off limits. That's not just bad news for immigration policy, it's a nightmare for Labour's ability to govern. And here's the part that Westminster dreads most. This is not a protest. This is not angry residents waving signs outside council buildings. This is a coordinated legal strike designed to hit fast, hit hard, and tie up the government in endless court battles. For Starmer, the optics are devastating. One moment he's insisting Labour has control, the next moment he's seen live, red-faced and raging, accusing Reform of tearing apart the Constitution. To the public, it doesn't look like strength. It looks like panic. And Richard Tice knows exactly what he's doing. By keeping the lead council secret, by refusing to reveal names, he's creating suspense and speculation. Every Reform-run council becomes a suspect. Every headline keeps the story alive. It's political theatre wrapped in legal strategy. Starmer's outburst only feeds into that narrative. Instead of rising above, he stepped into Tice's frame, a desperate prime minister fighting to stop a rebellion from below. And this is where the stakes rise even higher. If the court grants the injunction tomorrow night, it won't just be a reform victory. It will be the moment that proves central government is no longer untouchable. The countdown has already begun, and Westminster is running out of time. The aftermath of Starmer's outburst has only deepened the crisis. Within minutes, clips of his furious exchange with Richard Tice were spreading online, replayed across social media platforms, dissected by pundits and amplified by Reform supporters. What should have been a display of authority turned into a symbol of weakness. Labour MPs tried to defend their leader, insisting that Starmer was simply standing firm in the face of reckless extremism. But the reality is undeniable. Reform has dragged the Prime Minister into their battleground, forcing him to fight on their terms. That is a political disaster. Instead of shaping the national conversation, Labour is reacting to Reform's strategy, and every reaction makes Starmer appear less in control. At the heart of this crisis lies a truth the government has tried to bury. Local councils no longer trust central power. For decades, Whitehall dictated policy, and councils obeyed. But the migrant hotel crisis has pushed them past breaking point. Communities have complained about crime, overcrowding, and lack of consultation, only to be ignored. Reform spotted the weakness and moved in like a hawk. By encouraging councils to use the courts, Tice has transformed frustration into action. He calls it a legal uprising, and that phrase is sticking. Starmer's explosion proved just how much it rattled him. A calm Prime Minister would have shrugged it off. A rattled one lashes out. And Britain saw the latter live on screen. What makes this even more dangerous for Starmer is the timing. Reform didn't just launch this offensive randomly. They did it the moment the Bell Hotel ruling cracked the government's legal shield. That case showed councils can win. Suddenly, what once seemed impossible looks achievable. Now multiply that by 12 councils, each armed with lawyers, each prepared to file injunctions. The image is clear: central government under siege from every corner of the country. The media can't ignore it. The courts can't delay it. And the public, already weary of government failures, can't help but watch. Starmer's furious face is now the image of a Prime Minister who has lost control of events. But here's where things spiral even further. Behind closed doors, Labour officials are reportedly scrambling to contain the damage. Emergency meetings have been called, with ministers demanding urgent legal briefings. They know the 24-hour deadline is not just a political stunt, it is a ticking time bomb. If the government fails to block these injunctions, it hands Reform a monumental victory. And if the government somehow stops them, Reform still wins politically by painting Labour as the party of cover-ups, the party that ignores local communities and hides behind the courts. It's a trap with no good escape. Starmer's rage shows that he knows it. Meanwhile, Richard Tice is doubling down. He's presenting himself as the calm strategist, the man with a plan, while Starmer appears flustered and angry. It's a role reversal that nobody in Westminster expected. For months, Reform was dismissed as a protest party, a fringe movement with no serious power. But this coordinated council action has changed the entire perception. Suddenly, they look organised, disciplined, and capable of taking on the establishment. And every hour that ticks by makes Labour look weaker. The countdown to tomorrow night isn't just about the legal deadline. It's about whether the government itself can survive the storm of credibility that is hitting it. This is where the crisis sharpens into something bigger than migrant hotels. If councils succeed, it creates a precedent that strikes at the very heart of how Britain is governed. Local councils could challenge any national policy. That's why Starmer exploded, because deep down, he knows this fight isn't about hotels at all. It's about power itself. And if Labour loses this battle, it could lose the authority to govern altogether. The stage is set for a showdown that will define not just immigration policy, but the future balance of power between Westminster and local communities. The question now is simple. Can Starmer hold his government together, or has Reform just lit the fuse that blows it apart? The fallout from Keir Starmer's explosion was immediate, and the ripples spread like wildfire across Westminster. Within moments of the Prime Minister's fiery exchange with Richard Tice being broadcast, clips were circulating across every platform: X, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. The video was replayed by political commentators, dissected by analysts, and weaponised by Reform supporters, who framed it as the moment the Labour government lost its grip. What Starmer had intended as a firm rebuttal instead looked like panic. His tone wasn't calm or measured, it was explosive, the tone of a leader who suddenly realised the ground beneath him was shifting faster than he could control. Inside Labour's headquarters, the mood was described as shaken. Senior figures scrambled to issue statements defending the Prime Minister, claiming he was simply standing firm against what they described as reckless political tactics from Richard Tice and Reform UK. Yet their words rang hollow because the imagery was too powerful. For millions watching, Starmer didn't look like a leader in control of events. He looked cornered, flustered, and dangerously exposed. And in politics, perception is everything. When the leader of the country is seen losing his composure, it feeds the narrative that the government itself is losing control. At the centre of this storm is a truth that Labour has tried desperately to bury. Local councils are rebelling. For decades, central government dictated the terms, and councils fell in line. But the migrant hotel crisis has torn open a rift that may never heal. Communities up and down the country have spent months protesting outside hotels, raising concerns about safety, crime, and the sudden arrival of large groups of asylum seekers without consultation. Residents complained they were ignored. Councils complained they were powerless. And then came Richard Tice and Reform, spotting the weakness like predators circling wounded prey. By encouraging councils to lawyer up and take on Westminster in the courts, Reform transformed simmering anger into a weapon. This wasn't just protest politics anymore. This was legal warfare. Tice himself branded it a legal uprising, and those words now define the entire movement. Starmer's eruption proved that phrase wasn't hyperbole. It was reality, because deep down, the Prime Minister knows exactly what this means. If councils can use the courts to block migrant hotels, they can use the courts to block anything. The entire foundation of central power begins to crumble. And here's the detail that makes this moment so much more dangerous. Reform didn't launch this offensive randomly. They struck at the exact moment when Labour's legal shield cracked. The Court of Appeal's ruling on the Bell Hotel gave councils the precedent they needed. It showed, in black and white, that the government can be challenged and defeated. What was once unthinkable suddenly became possible. And that single decision has now unleashed a flood. Tice revealed that it wasn't just one council filing papers. At least 12 reform-aligned councils are preparing to follow. This isn't protest, this isn't symbolic. This is coordinated, organised and carefully timed for maximum political destruction. Now imagine the scene inside Downing Street. Ministers rushing between meetings, lawyers frantically drafting responses, senior advisors whispering that the Prime Minister's outburst has only made things worse. Because in politics, timing is everything, and the timing here is brutal. Reform's deadline isn't in weeks or months, it's in hours. By tomorrow night, the government must respond in court or face the humiliation of being overruled. Every hour that ticks by intensifies the pressure. The media can't resist a countdown clock, and that clock now hangs like a guillotine over Starmer's government. What's even more devastating for Labour is that this is a no-win situation. If the government manages to block the injunction, Reform will claim the establishment rigged the system to silence local voices. If the government fails, and the courts side with the councils, it will be a political bloodbath, proof that Starmer's government cannot control its own immigration policy. Either outcome feeds Reform's narrative. Either outcome strengthens Richard Tice's hand. Starmer knows this, and that's why he erupted live on air. It wasn't a calculated move. It was the raw anger of a man trapped with no way out. Meanwhile, Richard Tice is playing the role of strategist with unnerving calm. While Starmer fumes, Tice speaks in measured tones, presenting himself as the leader with a plan. He paints Reform as the party of ordinary people, standing up for communities ignored by the elite. The secrecy surrounding the lead council adds to the drama. Tice refuses to name it, creating a guessing game that keeps the media hooked. Every council under Reform's influence becomes a suspect. Every headline speculates on who will strike next. This is political theatre, yes, but it's theatre with teeth, because behind the drama lies real legal action with real consequences. And let's be clear, the scale of organisation behind this is staggering. Coordinating 12 councils to file simultaneous legal challenges is not amateur hour politics. It requires funding, expert legal advice, disciplined communication, and absolute secrecy. Reform has shown, with this move, that they are no longer a fringe protest party. They are acting like a serious political machine, one that can embarrass the government on the national stage. That transformation terrifies Labour. Because for years, Reform was dismissed as noise. Now they are the story. The implications of this crisis stretch far beyond immigration policy. If councils succeed, it sets a precedent that local authorities can challenge any national decision they dislike. Housing, healthcare, education, policing, all could be dragged into the courts. Westminster's authority would be shattered. Starmer knows it, his advisors know it, and even his critics inside Labour know it. That's why his reaction was so explosive. Because this isn't just about hotels. This is about power itself. Who has it, who doesn't, and whether central government can still claim to control the country. Yet for all the risks, Labour is trapped. They cannot back down on migrant hotels, because doing so would look like surrender. They cannot silence the councils, because doing so would prove Reform's point about an arrogant, unaccountable government. They cannot stall for time, because the deadline is fixed. And so they fight, not because they are confident, but because they have no choice. This is why Starmer's fury rang so loud. It was the voice of a leader, cornered, fighting to survive. The danger for Labour is that the public sees all of this not as strength, but as weakness. When a Prime Minister loses his cool on live TV, it doesn't inspire confidence. It breeds doubt. And doubt is deadly in politics. Every replay of Starmer's red-faced outburst, every headline about Reform's legal uprising, chips away at the government's image of control. For Reform, this is a dream scenario. For Labour, it is a nightmare with no end in sight. And the countdown continues. The courts will decide tomorrow night. Reform's councils are ready. The lawyers are standing by. And Westminster is bracing for impact. What happens in the next 24 hours could redefine the balance of power in Britain for decades to come. Hours remain until the legal deadline hits, and the air in Westminster is thick with fear, speculation, and the stench of desperation. Keir Starmer's eruption at Richard Tice has now become the symbol of this crisis. A red-faced Prime Minister shouting into the void as the machinery of government begins to creak under the weight of its own failure. For the first time since taking power, Starmer is no longer setting the agenda. He is reacting, he is chasing events, and he is losing. The government's frantic attempts to manage this storm only prove how fragile its grip has become. Legal advisors are pulling all-nighters, ministers are holding back-to-back crisis calls, and Downing Street insiders whisper that Starmer himself has barely slept. Yet none of it changes the simple fact. Reform has the upper hand, and the courts hold the key. The risk here is existential. If even one council wins tomorrow night, Labour's immigration strategy collapses. That victory would act like a spark in dry grass, igniting a wildfire of challenges from councils across the country. Overnight, local authorities could become emboldened to resist central dictates not just on migrant hotels, but on every unpopular policy Westminster tries to enforce. Starmer knows this, and it is why he lashed out so violently against Tice. Because what reform is doing is not just about migrants or hotels. It is about dismantling the myth of central authority. And once that myth is broken, it can never be restored. Meanwhile, Richard Tice is basking in the chaos. He doesn't need to shout or rage. He simply feeds the narrative one careful line at a time, knowing every word drives the knife deeper into Labour's side. His refusal to name the lead council has turned the entire country into a guessing game. Journalists are chasing leads, speculating on which council will strike next, and reform gets blanket coverage without spending a penny. It is masterful political theatre combined with ruthless strategy. And the more Starmer protests, the stronger Tice looks. The contrast is stark, a calm strategist versus an angry, panicking Prime Minister.
The public, too, is watching with growing unease. For ordinary Britons, the migrant hotel issue has never been just about policy. It is about trust, safety, and the sense that their voices no longer matter. Starmer's rage confirms their suspicion that Labour is deaf to their concerns. Reform, by contrast, is presenting itself as the party of action, the party willing to fight, the party that listens. That image, carefully crafted, ruthlessly executed, is sinking into the national psyche. In politics, perception often matters more than reality, and right now the perception is clear. Reform is bold, Labour is broken. If tomorrow night ends with a court victory for reform, the political earthquake will be immediate. Labour's credibility will be in tatters, Starmer's authority shattered, and the road to the next election transformed. If the government somehow manages to block the injunctions, reform still wins by claiming the establishment rigged the game. Either way, Labour loses. That is why this countdown feels so deadly. It is not just a legal case. It's not just a fight over hotels. It is a moment of truth for the entire Labour project and perhaps even for the future of British governance. And so Britain waits. The courtrooms are prepared. The lawyers are ready. Reform's councils stand firm. Westminster trembles. The Prime Minister fumes. Richard Tice smiles. By tomorrow night, the answer will be clear. Either Labour holds the line and risks looking like the enemy of its own people, or the council's triumph and Westminster's power is torn apart in full view of the world. Either way, UK politics will never be the same again. The 24-hour deadline has become the ticking clock of destiny, and when it strikes zero, Britain will witness a reckoning that no government spin can cover up. This is not just another news cycle, this is history in motion. Starmer's explosion was the crack in the dam, and the floodwaters are now rushing toward Parliament. The next move belongs not to the Prime Minister, not even to reform, but to the courts. And when that gavel falls, Britain will wake up to a new political reality, one where power itself is up for grabs, and where the balance between central government and local communities will never again be the same.